got that dope.
What's going on, my beautiful, powerful, loving, wealthy, successful, and generous queens and kings? It's your boy LB the Motivator, and we are back for another episode of the Tulsa Roundtable. And I just want to thank you all so much for coming. And look, you are not going to want to miss this conversation. It's going to be a fire one. This conversation is on fire. Tonight, we are talking about Black women in education. And look, with everything going on in the country, with everything going on in this world, we need to highlight some phenomenal women. And the women of the Black women who have been in education, doing the work, putting in the grind, and really changing lives. So we just want to highlight Black women and talk about the impact they have had and are having in our education field. So tonight I have two phenomenal special guests. And look, I'm about to bring them to the table. First, I want to bring up Dr. Davita Haywood, who currently serves as the Vice President of Student Affairs at Johnson C. Smith University. I met Dr. Haywood while I was a student at Alabama State University, and trust me, she is a transformational leader. She has poured all she can into her students, and look, I remember her from state. There are so many more that remember her from her time at ASU, and everywhere she has gone, every institution she has touched, she is remembered. Even when she was getting her degree at The Ohio State University, or PhD, she actually won the William E. Loban Most Outstanding Dissertation Award for Educational Policy, and that was in 2010. Dr. Davita Haywood is phenomenal. So please, 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 Dr. Davita Haywood, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And next, we also have Dr. Zilla Fluker. Dr. Fluker is phenomenal. She's changed my life. She's been my mentor since we met back at ASU in 2014. I was a bright-eyed, very, very confident young man. And our very first interaction, she said, "Who are you?" And I told her I was going to be the next president of the United States. And from then, she has mentored me. She has been a mother figure in my life and has really groomed me. Dr. Fluker received her PhD from Alabama State University and has just recently joined Central State University as the Vice President of Institutional Advancement in August of 2020. Dr. Fluker and Dr. Haywood, I just want to thank you all so much. Again, Dr. Fluker has over 15 years of leadership experience in corporate America and in higher education. So give both our guests a round of applause from home. Drop some fire in the comments. Get them hyped. Let them know we're here and we're listening. Give them some energy. Thank you both so much for being here. I love you, and let's get this going. So, first, I would like Dr. Haywood, if you could please come to the screen, and we are going to allow Dr. Haywood to give a little bit more about who she is. And actually, Dr. Haywood, both of you, Dr. Haywood and Dr. Fluker, if you don't mind sharing, how did you get to your role? So give us more about your journey to your current roles.
Yeah, so I want to make sure, can you hear me, Lamar?
Yes, ma'am, I hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. So first, let me say thank you to you and Dr. Fluker just for being in this space, particularly on a Friday night. It's a joy to be with those who have joined us. Thank you so much for taking the time. I found my way to higher ed like most folks in student affairs do. We find it by accident. Normally, we have been student leaders on our campus, and I was one of those students and loved serving and giving back and doing campus tours and being involved. And all it took was a vice president of student affairs to say to me, you know, you can do this for the rest of your life. And what that conversation eventually turned into was applying to graduate school at The Ohio State University, going up to Ohio, learning at the proverbial knees of some of the best scholars in the world, and them pouring into me and empowering me to be a change agent and a change leader. And that then just set off the cycle for me to serve at whatever institution I found myself at. And so, yeah, it's been about 23 years. I can't believe it, but I wouldn't take anything back for that journey. I love what I do. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I can't wait to dive more into your story and more into your unique experiences. Dr. Fluker, could you please share how did you end up at Central State University as the Vice President of Institutional Advancement?
No, definitely. Yeah, so it was a very fortunate experience. My journey, as you mentioned, started off in corporate America, and I always had a passion for higher education. When you have a chance to attend an HBCU, in my case, Alabama State University, you develop a natural passion to want to be involved in a very permanent and meaningful way. Spent some time in corporate America, and my husband had an opportunity to relocate to Alabama, and my alma mater invited me to come and be a part. And that is where I learned this higher ed conversation, specifically around institutional advancement. Fast forward a little bit, I spent some time at Miles College, and then I stepped out because I wanted to work with other HBCUs, and I had a chance to work with about 18 HBCUs as an entrepreneur. But to be perfectly honest with you, you find people that you follow that you have an interest in. And I met President Jack Thomas in 2014, actually, while I was at Alabama State, and had always followed his career. And when I heard that he was looking to go back into higher education, I followed him and reached out, and he invited me to apply for this opportunity. And when I think about what it is that I believe is my purpose to be here, which is really to cultivate and develop leaders, I saw that as my opportunity to really help address some of the opportunity areas, some of the challenges that we're facing as a country, to go back into HBCUs to really cultivate young Black leaders, Lamar, like the experience we've had, to really give them the exposure and develop them, to bring them to a space where they too can transform not only their lives, but the communities and the families that they represent, so that we can elevate our HBCU graduates and the communities in which they represent. So that's how I got here. And Central State University is a very special place. We're in the middle of somewhere. And I'm honored to be on this call specifically with Dr. Davita Haywood, because I learned a lot from her. And, being in Ohio, in her former stomping grounds, I'm being exposed to some of the things that she was exposed to. And for that, I'm grateful.
Thank you both. Again, thank you both so much for being here, for sharing, opening and sharing your stories about how did you manage to get to your role. I want to take the clocks back. I want to rewind it back to the time at ASU, where we all had the fortunate opportunity to be for a very short period of time together and explore the fact that when I met both of you, you were not in the classroom. You weren't my professor. You weren't my teacher. You were two administrators that made it your purpose to get involved with students. It wasn't like you accidentally talked to students on your way to the cafeteria or into your car, but both of you made it intentional to be involved with students and what they were going through in our personal lives, in our educational experience, in our careers, how we were deciding the career moves. And I just want to know, for both of you, how did you manage to navigate this space of education, even though you are not directly involved in the teaching or educating, the formal classroom instruction, rather, of the students?
So I can jump in here. I think one of the things, Lamar, is that we were constantly reminding students that those of us in student affairs were educators too. So no, we don't stand in front of a classroom or a podium and dictate lessons. But what we do is outside of the classroom, we create what we like to refer to as that living and learning experience. And when we really think about college students, you spend roughly about 15 to 20 hours inside of a physical classroom, but a lot of learning occurs outside of that space, in the residence halls, in the student union, even on the physical campus, being outside. So my commitment to sort of being in the trenches with students is what you alluded to earlier. Our work as educators, regardless if you're a faculty member, a staff member is to transform students. When we receive you at move-in, we are accepting you from your parents, and our job is to pour into you so that 4 years, when you get ready to walk across that stage, one, as professionals, we know that we have done our job, but two, we're sending you out into the world as a transformed individual. And I'm not sure I would do anything else where I know, even on the toughest days, I wouldn't work in a space or a position if I knew that the little nuggets that I'm able to share with students, if that's not going to help them make a difference in the long run. And I think to your point, all of us have a vocational calling, right? So we go to school, we major in something, and we hope that's what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. But I often challenge myself, and I try to challenge the students that I work with, that it is about finding your passion and connecting whatever is at your core that makes you happy, it makes you content, and able to sort of leave a legacy or a path. So again, I don't think I would do anything else if I didn't have the opportunity, even on my most challenging days, to pour into students.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think I've often said that on a college campus, on any college campus, you have two roles. You're either a student or you're a teacher, period. The whole idea is about transforming lives through education, and each of us plays a role in the educational journey. But for what I do, my job has always been to identify value in the institution and then convince individuals and or organizations, i.e. corporations, to make an investment into the university in the fundraising and institution advancement space, or development, as some people call it. And the truth of the matter is, I realized early on that the greatest single value proposition of any institution of higher learning is in the evidence space. Companies ship products every day, and those products, whether it's a vehicle or a computer or a mobile device, depreciate in value as soon as those products go across that conveyor belt. Higher education is a little different. When our products ship, in some cases it's May, and other cases it's December, some have summer commencements, they appreciate in value. And so as far as building that relationship with students, I realized that if I was going to be held accountable for building relationships with corporations to make substantial investments into the university, I realized that it was important to understand the product first. And stepping into advisory roles and mentoring roles and even developing programming that engaged students gave me a lens and a perspective that I think gave me a competitive edge, and I still think it does today, to understand the product that we're trying to get investors to make an investment in. So even in the institutional advancement space, I find that that relationship with the student helps me better package the institution so I can have direct evidence as to what it is that we're doing. But any institution is best defined by the goal, and the goal simply being placement, right? We go to college, we make an investment, we spend a lot of dollars, but at the end of the day, the value proposition is tied in where do your students land? And where they land then translates to them becoming gainfully employed and subsequently becoming alumni who give back. And so it helps me a great deal to build a relationship with students, because someday down the road, those individuals will become the donors who come back and give to the institution, promote and advocate for the institution, and carry the brand of the institution. So that's really the model that I follow. And it's a little untraditional, but it is the model that I think is successful. And we're starting to see people move more towards that model.
Thank you both so much for sharing. And when you're speaking of this transformation, the importance of education and coming to college is the transformation of the students. And both of you hit on it, these relationships that you're authentically building with your students. And it's so, so, so important. I believe that the administrators, the professors, that we all have these authentic relationships together, because that really changes the experience. I know for myself personally, when I entered into my college classrooms, if I didn't have a relationship with the professor that I was entering into that classroom or into that space with, I would learn the information, but once I left, there was nothing else but information given. And it didn't always stick. The relationship made what I was being taught, made the experience stick with me rather than just being dismissive or poured out for the next semester. And so with that being said, we're moving into 2021. We are moving into 2020. We're in 2021. Excuse me. We're in 2021. And we are talking about, and in our country, we're seeing unrest. There's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of things going on that could put a lot of fear in a lot of people. And it makes us question what's going on overall in our government, all the way down to what's happening in education, what's happening with our police forces, what's happening with like businesses. And it's all breaking this racial barrier. As Black women, what value do you see in Black women being in education and being a part of a system that in the beginning was never truly created for Black people? What value do you see there, and how can we increase that impact of Black people in educational spaces?
Dr. Fluker, you want to take a stab, or?
I'm happy to. My lens is I've only ever, so you heard my background, corporate America, and transitioned straight into HBCUs. And as it relates to the overall value, HBCUs were created in response to creating a space for African Americans to matriculate in the academy. And when you think back to the Civil War and those schools that were founded in that mid 1860s, 1850s space, that was the answer, because we were not allowed at some point in time to actually transition into the predominantly white institutions as we know them today. A lot of people have questioned the value of those schools existing today and continuing to exist. And I would argue that now more than ever, they're that much more relevant. But as far as the valuable component, it's about positioning a particular population with access. We know that access makes a world of difference. And then what comes along with access is then the exposure, right? You have access to the institutions, and now you have the exposure to the opportunities. And that is what then impacts the ability for an individual to reposition themselves in society socioeconomically, and to address some of the things that hold people back in some instances. I've only ever worked at HBCU, so I'm not as familiar with the PWI space and environment. I would argue that when I separated from the HBCU space, in my returning back, I was very intentional. It was the first time in my job that I did first time in my career where I did a very narrow job search, focusing exclusively on HBCUs and identifying a space where I felt like I could fully expand that which I thought I brought to the table, and create that value proposition, because I do think that higher education is a differentiating factor. It is an element that creates a competitive edge. And if done correctly and done well, it does transform not only the individual's lives, but the space in which the individual comes from. So that's kind of my take on that particular question in terms of placing value and the value of the educational experience.
Yeah, and so Lamar, I would echo what Dr. Fluker has shared. And then if we narrow that down to the experiences and contributions of women of color, in particular, Black women, I think we, given all that's happening right now in our country, I think we have to pause and pay homage to the sisters who've been in the educational fight from the very beginning. When I think about the foundings of some of our institutions as schools, institutions, school labs, women were right there at the forefront, not only contributing to the curriculum, but as I often like to think, sort of the think tanks in the kitchen, right? While they were cooking and serving, they were also dispensing knowledge to students. And so I don't think we can talk about the HBCU world without acknowledging those African-American women who were teachers, headmistresses, headmasters, principals in the broadest sense. And even when I look at the demographics of higher education today, what we do know is that higher ed is browning and it is getting older. And that will mean and command and demand a very different type of institution in terms of the students that they will serve. It is also not lost on us in terms of the demographics that women continue to populate our institutions. And so something that Dr. Fluker said earlier, how does that translate to the corporate space? How does that translate to graduate schools and professional programs? When we know, I know it's a favorite mantra on TVs, but on T-shirts, but the future is female, and so we owe it to our foremothers to continue the great tradition of higher education.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much. Speaking of, so I read recently an article actually dropped June of 2020 that Black women are actually the most educated group in the U.S. Currently, and I think that is phenomenal. From your perspective, why do you think that is? And yet, as the most educated group, we are still seeing the wages aren't matching up. The opportunities don't match up. The credit that we are give Black women isn't matching up to the fact that we are seeing Black women be the most educated group and they're excelling in all areas, but they aren't getting what they deserve. Why do you think there's such an increase in that education?
I'll jump in. I mean, so we do see this trend. I mean, I think that as a Black woman, I often get asked, why do you have 4 degrees? I have a thirst for learning. I think that's a Zilla thing. I can't categorize that. But as it relates to the opportunities that are put in front of us and the challenges that come along with it, I think sometimes we have to take into consideration how we got to where we are or why we're where we are. And we can't lose sight of the social constructions built around a particular demographic or a particular category of people. And I think the social constructions that surround the Black woman are real. We express ourselves in one particular way. And, you've seen the whole idea of the irate or the irrational or the aggressive Black woman because of the passion and the drive in which we energize. I'll give you an example that's very real. I speak with my hands a lot. And I didn't realize how much I spoke with my hands until this new flat world of Zoom and virtual meetings. And when you're doing this a lot on a video, you can see it a lot more than if you're in a room looking at an audience, because you're not always looking at a large image of yourself. And my hands are not particularly small. So the expression is not always understood. And I'm not sure where that stems from. Maybe it stems from my being a Zimbabwean with a lot of drive and passion and enthusiasm. But I think that there's a misunderstanding that's really built around a social construction that doesn't necessarily fit the mold of the Black woman as it relates to our passion and drive that we bring to the table. In general, I think that the opportunities and the alignment with the wages and all of what you mentioned, I mean, that's real, but it's not really exclusive to education. In my corporate experience, we see that trend. I'm the first person to tell you that while people get excited about the first Black woman, I hope for a day in my life where we're no longer celebrating the first Black woman anything, because the world has reached a point where it's all about talent and what people bring to the table, and where it's not a big deal anymore because we've seen more than just one person make it to that space. I do think that we're in the season of the Black woman. Yes, we have our vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, a woman who represents several cultures to include the Black woman. And we're seeing the evolution and influence of other Black women. We've seen that trend over the years, many, many years. But the truth of the matter is, I think we've reached a point now where the value of the Black woman, I think, is understood. And then now we have a responsibility, I think, as Black women to then cultivate the next generation of leaders and influencing them with that which inspired us to get to where we are. And what I value the most is that in the role that I'm in, on a campus that has majority women and majority African Americans a chance to really help influence that culture, to help them understand that there are no limitations, that you can do whatever it is that you aspire to. It does require a lot of hard work, a lot of focus, and a lot of determination. But more importantly, there are people who are there to support you, like myself and others, who really want to see you, quite frankly, get well beyond that which we've achieved ourselves as individuals. So that's my take on that in terms of that particular space and that particular question.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think, again, about the times that we are living in, even with COVID-19. I think I read something the other day where economists are referring to this period for women as the she session, right? Because when we think about the breadwinners for our families, in particular families of color, oftentimes it is the women. And so what gives me hope is what Dr. Fluker referred to. I think what you're seeing now are Black women who've always owned their power, now dispensing and demonstrating it. We've shown you what we can do, what we've always been doing when it comes to the power of voting. You now have experienced what we can contribute and demonstrate when it comes to education and at government levels. I don't think there's anything that exists that we can't tackle. Oftentimes being multitaskers, doing the delicate dance of balancing many different agendas and coming through. And I think what you see with this generation of Black women, they are owning that, and then they are defining that experience. And I think in the past, when we have allowed people to speak for us, Black women are possessing that voice where they're saying, I don't need you to tell my story. I don't need you to tell my narrative. Let me do that for myself. And I think with the space of social media, that has allowed a number of Black women to tell their own stories in their own way, at their own time.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. The value of the Black woman is being seen. The value of the Black woman is being recognized by all people. And I love it. I love it. I love that we are getting to the point of understanding that we all have value, and no one person, no one group is above anybody else. And for Black women, that's absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to see where the future goes. As long as we continue this trend of love, peace, positivity, and growth. Right. I know things can look bad sometimes, but we're on a trend where people are being recognized and accepted, and it's just a phenomenal. So back to education and getting involved with education. Do either of you believe there's something that our education system is lacking or could add as a vital element in educating Black people? There seems to be, when I talk to a lot of my friends, in my time as a teacher, I taught 8th grade science. There seems to be a lack of enthusiasm for Blackness inside of education outside of Black spaces. So for students who end up not going to an HBCU for higher education, or for students who go through K through 12 and they don't have a Black teacher, is there something that we can do on our end as educators to make sure that Black people are being educated properly in this current time, with the history of who we are, the history of our nation, and the possibilities that are presented to our people?
Go ahead, Fluker.
Sure. I don't think to understand diversity, you have to be in a diverse space. I think the accountability comes back to those who are telling the story and or sharing the information. And I think we have a responsibility to be responsible. And here's what I mean by that. There are narratives that are built, and part of what we're experiencing now is reconstructing some of those narratives, right? There are certain stories that I learned in 3rd grade that have since been modified about US presidents or certain leaders, or particular individuals that I once cherished. There are certain narratives that have had to transform because we've either learned more about that circumstance and situation. I have a dear friend who just took a great job at the University of Virginia, and she and I talk a great deal about how that narrative is changing around our third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, because we've learned more. And quite frankly, as that is evolving, the responsibility is on the educator to stay on top of the new discoveries, the greater understanding, and making sure that that is completely shared. The beauty of the education process is exactly that, is that it transforms real time before us. And the responsibility falls upon those of us who are sharing that message and conveying that and making sure that we're being up to date. Because the story that we told, and I'm going to pick on Thomas Jefferson, the story we told about Thomas Jefferson when I was in third grade is a very different story than the one we would tell today because of the discoveries that researchers and or historians have told. And the key is to understand that the evolution and the narrative is in constant evolution, rather, and it's a responsibility on those of us on the education front to make sure that we're being as up to date or up to the minute as possible to make sure that we are transforming these lives with up to date information in a way that's really impactful and really making a difference in the greater understanding of the environments in which we operate.
Yeah, and I would add to, I think we as a community have to do a better job of embracing culturally relevant theory and being okay talking about it and informing others that it does exist. Because when we think about how curricular is developed, whether or not that's K through 12 or in higher education, representation matters. And even if you aren't representative, being educated and have some understanding provide some value. I often think about some of the theorists in student affairs and a number of scholars who have put forth critical theories, right, that critique the majority or critique the mainstream, have been helpful in terms of students seeing themselves perhaps or not in these narratives, and then being given the power to define their own experiences and speak for themselves. And I would agree with Fluker again. I think about some of the things that perhaps have whittled away in our communities that as a child coming up, I'm grateful that my parents and family members exposed those opportunities to me. What I'm talking about are civic and social organizations for youth, debutante balls, battalions, Sunday and Saturday enrichment programs that put children of color in front of professionals of color, so that you can't be what you can't see. But I had the opportunity to see these community leaders, these servant leaders doing amazing work. And then I could sort of envision and imagine myself doing that too. So some of this is also returning to the things, the grounding, the roots that worked for us initially, and perhaps putting, if you will, a 21st century lens on that perspective.
Absolutely. I think culturally relevant pedagogy was something that Teach for America, they were preaching to us from the day we got in until we become alumni, from day one to the end. And it's about making sure that how we teach our lessons, whether it's science, math, history, English, whatever we're teaching to our students, we make it relevant to who they are as individuals based upon their culture and their identity. My next question is, your identity and who you are as a Black woman, is it fully accepted in education, or is it something where you have to pick and choose at times whether you're going to be a woman or whether you're going to be Black when you're advocating for students, when you're fighting for injustice, or you're fighting against things inside of your institutions or fighting for things in your institutions? Are you fully accepted for who you are, or are you having to pick which identity you want to represent?
It's a loaded question, right, Lamar?
Yeah, I know we don't have time to talk about all of it, so we might have to bring another episode in. But please, as much as you can.
Yeah, so I'll offer this perspective. I think My professional journey has taught me a number of lessons. I acknowledge that when I show up to a space, I come with the triumvirate of being Black, woman, and class, right? And so there are instances where, um, while you know your worth, you are constantly in this battle of trying to demonstrate it to others. Meaning, yes, you come prepared to show up and show out, but there are instances where people question your credibility, no matter how many degrees you have. There are those who perhaps don't think you belong. I also like to say there are those who think you should always have on your pearls and gloves, and you're supposed to be this meek, quiet, unassertive, unassured, professional. And I know better. And so I think part of our being is knowing who you are at your core and being able to explicate that to others so that they are able to take you serious. So that when you walk into a space, you command and demand some attention, but you also have to be thorough and you can't come half stepping. You always got to know your stuff. I can recall times in my professional journey where it has been disheartening. And let me just say, not only in predominantly white spaces, because sometimes in those spaces, you know the mechanisms, the coping mechanisms, the strategies that you will have to employ just to fight another day. And you have to figure out, okay, what battle, the racial, the gender, both of them, I'm going to fight today. But let me tell you where it hurts and sometimes where it cuts deep and where you really have to sharpen the armor, right? Is when you're amongst your own. And even in some of our historically Black colleges and universities, that particular space, history space, love the spaces. I think sometimes we have to step back and understand how both race and gender and even class play out. And sometimes, as much as we are committed to doing good, on other occasions, we cause a little bit of harm that rests and lives with professionals so much sometimes that they have to take a step back. You love your people, but sometimes we don't treat each other and treat each other well or best. So I'll leave it there because that's a loaded question, Lamar.
I would agree wholeheartedly, and I think Dr. Hayward, it's a heavy question, and I think what I would say is this: I have two career experiences: corporate America, higher education. I'll compare those two very briefly. In the corporate space, being Black and being a woman, ever having to choose. When you come into, I began my professional career in the year 2000, and it was a time when a lot of who I am was trending, whether it was me being Black, being a woman, being a foreign national, being from another country, an African country to be specific. All of that played in, having to choose. Yeah, there was a lot of, we call it code switching, but when you got multiple codes, code adjustment was real. As far as belonging, being questioned, that's part of it. I love how Dr. Hayward talked about choosing when to wear the pearls and gloves, because you guys know my personality is all about pearls and gloves, right? But the truth of the matter is, I once heard a speaker say that we have to pick and choose when and how we decide to bring our whole selves to the space. We often get this saying of, bring your whole self to work. That's the diversity and inclusion initiative. But the truth is, what I learned in the corporate space, and I'm learning it in higher education. I mentioned earlier, my higher education experience is in the HBCU space, but call it what you will. When I became a vice president in the HBCU space, I was 37 years old. And if you know anything about the age trends in the higher ed space, that's really young. And in my case, I became a vice president at my alma mater. And so I had administrative assistants who I used to work for as a student worker and had to kind of work through the age barrier. So we have to look at all different aspects of who we are and how we're received. I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but I'm just trying to paint a picture. And the whole self-to-work piece, this one speaker, Carolyn Wonga, she's the former chief diversity officer at Target. She said, you have to decide when and where to deliver that. The truth of the matter is we can bring our whole selves to work, but only when we have proven that we're in alignment with the vision and the agenda of the organization. In the corporate space, have you proven that you're here to help the company make money? And what activities have you done to do that? Once you've done that, now you can come bring ideas and people will understand, oh, well, if Fluker's bringing an idea here, she's proven she's here to help us make money. So if the idea is being presented by her, it aligns with helping us hit that bottom line. Similarly, in the higher education space, in my case, HBCUs in particular, have you proven that what you're bringing to the table is going to add value to what it is that we're trying to get done? Is going to align with what the vision is for this leader? Because in higher education, it very much is tied to the administration and the vision of the existing leader. And when you're able to prove that, you're able to push that agenda along. So I think we have to look at who we are and what we bring to the table as a Black person, as an African American, as a woman, as a person in a particular age category. And then from there, we decide, how does that align with the broader value? And I think you do have to be calculated with how you bring that to the table. But I mean, we could have a whole show on this question alone. I mean, it's a loaded topic. I think of it every day. And every role that I've had in higher education, I've had to think about, not just in the instance of joining the organization, but over time, I've had to evolve and think about, how is this evolving and how am I modifying my approach to make sure that I'm accommodating the interest of those who are the influencers of the day? Because every job I've ever had in higher education, I've worked at the pleasure of. And if you know anything about working at the pleasure of, it's real. And it can not be the pleasure of on an instant. So I just think that's a great question and a great discussion point that I think is worthy of a broader stage. But that's my response that I'll contain at this point.
Well, thank you both for sharing. I definitely understand it's a very loaded, very loaded question. And we keep talking about a possible thing. We might have to get you all back for another episode. I want to take a brief pause right now to let it be known that tonight we're doing something different. We're adding a new feature to our roundtable. We're having a live Q&A. So you're going to be able to text the number. It shows it's at the bottom of the screen, the number 704-615-6585. You can text that number if you are interested in coming on live and asking our two phenomenal guests a question. So we're going to have that happen tonight before we get off. So I'm going to ask probably one or two more questions, and then we're going to jump into the live Q&A. So as a Black man, I understand that I have privilege, that in certain spaces, I have a level of privilege that's not afforded to Black women. So as a Black man, there are many Black men watching, how can we use our privilege to benefit Black women and help erase the gap that has been created by the systems that be?
Yeah, I'll just jump out there and say endorse, endorse, endorse. I don't think you have to separate it as much as the gender would suggest, but if it's a good and meaningful initiative, endorse it, buy into it, regardless of the source that it comes from. We're diversifying well beyond gender. We're diversifying well beyond our own individual interests, our geographies, our locations. You know, we've got to figure out a way to have more meaningful dialogue so that the ideas and or solutions that are presented are understood by all so that we can all buy into them. The buy-in is real and it's necessary. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the individualities or the individuals that are tied to a conversation and not looking at the bigger picture. But I think endorsing the ideas is a great way to support as a Black male. We know the power that is held and we know the power that you hold. And I think there's value in assessing the situation and buying into it and endorsing that which aligns with what the broader vision is of the organization or the individuals working together for a common cause.
Yeah, so Dr. Fluker used the word endorsing. I'm going to use the word allyship, right? And so there are times where no matter your capacity, you can feel like you're out there all alone, standing out on a limb, but you're core and you're convicted to do the work. And I can tell you in my own professional journey, it has felt good when an ally has stood with me. And whether or not they're standing beside me, if they're in my ear or behind me, it makes the work all the more worthy. And so I would challenge any of the folks who have joined us this evening as you are working in places and spaces. And when you know the work is meaningful and it is going to make a difference, and there is somebody leading that work that just needs an extra hand or support, be that ally, no matter who they are. Because again, when we're talking about students, our job is to transform. I often say to my colleagues, this work is not about me, it's not about you, but it is about them. And we've been entrusted to caretake of human beings that, again, the end game is to transform them.
Definitely pushing allyship, endorsing, being able to, honestly, in my opinion, I feel like sometimes we should step back and let women be recognized. Like, hey, don't try to jump in front and take the recognition. You did this, you did that. Like, just step back and let the women be recognized for the great work that they are doing. And that has been what I've seen in a lot of spaces. So thank you both for your responses. No questions yet. So we're going to move on to the next one. Both of you are change agents. You have, everywhere you go, every space that you come into, you're working to change it and make it better. So what are your steps, or what is your advice of creating a staircase to change for everyone coming behind you, no matter who they are, no matter what identity that they have, but creating this staircase to change so that they can climb to the ranks that you have climbed and possibly even go beyond?
I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, I mean, I'm so in the I'm going to go back to corporate because that's where I learned everything I know. We're big on process documentation, right? Corporations thrive off of the fact that turnover means nothing. You can change the CEO, but the company continues on because you have documented processes. I think capturing as much as you can the intent, the vision, the strategy, the process centered around what it is that you were trying to get done is a big part of it. But continuity is what really defines. Continuity can influence the success of an organization. Continuity in activity, continuity in effort, continuity in tenure, but that's not always guaranteed. So if you're going to leave a legacy, if you're going to leave a program in place, you have to have put in the structures and empowered individuals to understand the vision in order to be able to preserve that which is the intended goal, which is to preserve the plan or the effort and whatnot. So I think making sure that you take the time to realize that change is influenced by process improvement. And in higher education, continuous improvement and process improvement and Six Sigma and all those things haven't really been popular. But when they are implemented, when you do take the time to document those processes, when you do take the time to cross-train individuals to be able to carry on processes, even when people have actually left the space, that's when you see the greatest value. But doing all of that, understanding that there also has to be an evolution, because as times change, and we learn this a great deal with the current pandemic that we're navigating through, as times change, you have to show some flexibility and ability to move with the changing times and to be responsive to the evolution of whatever it is that's influencing that immediate change. So flexibility in alignment with well-documented processes, I think helps influence that drive for being a change agent to implement initiatives and sustain operations and or activities that are meaningful to the bottom line of the organization, in this case, into higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I think there is some value in assessing the situation. Assessment for me is always critical because then that gives you some insight in terms of how you plan strategically and how to be proactive instead of reactive. And I think Dr. Fluker would agree with me. As much as we like to think of higher ed being in sort of these four walls, it changes on a daily basis. Yes, there are sort of trends and forecasts and all of that involved with higher ed, but you can come to work one day with a things to do list, and this is what I'm going to accomplish, and you spend most of your day in crisis management. So it's not for the faint of heart. And so it's so important if you're going to try to impact change, you got to know what you're trying to change and why is there a need for change and what happens if we don't change. And so often in organizations, at times we like to skip that sort of grunt work, that trench work. But again, in the long run, if we're trying to get to the end game, those kinds of things matter because they not only inform the current work at hand, but they influence the identity, the brand of the institution, how others see and experience, which is something that Dr. Fluker said earlier, that notion to be able to attract people back to your institution or attract them as potential students, help them matriculate and then graduate and hopefully become giving alums and supporters of the institution. So in order to be a change agent, you got to know what you're changing and why you're changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can't change anything if you don't know exactly what you're going to change. And thank you for that response. Being proactive here. If you've enjoyed this conversation, if you've thought that it's been fruitful, it's added to your life, it's given value, and you feel like someone else should hear more of these conversations and you want to help support what the Tulsa Initiative is doing, please do not forget to donate. You can log on to our website at www.tulsanonprofit.org, or you can donate via Cash App at Tulsa Nonprofit, $ Tulsa Nonprofit. So we do have a question. That's come in. Dr. Fluker, it's asked that you expound on working at the pleasure of on a job and how not to get burnt out doing so, knowing that and being so familiar with that space.
Unmute. Working at the pleasure of, you're at this level, you're hired, and it's understood that you work at the pleasure of the president. My personal experience, I've had a chance to work. I worked for 5 presidents in 8 years. I'm now on my 6th president now, 6 months in at Central State University. And the truth of the matter is, you sign up for an opportunity. And if you think about a senior leader needs to have the ability to make difficult decisions and change their team based on their ability to understand the circumstance and respond accordingly. And for those of us who sign up for these jobs, we understand that that could mean a direct impact on who you are today and who you might be tomorrow. But the second part of your question is can you repeat the second part of your question?
Yes. So the second part of the question was, how do you not get burnt out always working at the pleasure of?
Well, there's 2 things. So there's a pleasure of piece, but how do you not get burnt out working in a space? I'm going to answer a slightly different question than the question asked. How do you not get burnt out working in your passion? I love working in higher education. I love developing young leaders. It's, I think, a personal passion. I'll go further and say that I think it's a calling. But you do have to think about, where do you add the greatest value? And when you really evaluate where you add the greatest value, you've got to think about, well, what do I need to do in order to sustain that? And you have to evaluate your time and effort and make sure that your time and effort continues to be meaningful. But also, as a mother and as a wife, it's important for you to understand, how does that all fit into your personal structure? And how do you make sure you don't compromise an element of who you are, in an effort to fulfill your passion? I'll be honest with you, for me personally, that has been a struggle. I don't think I really was able to achieve that in my first tour of HBCUs, because I spent more time sometimes working, and then I struggled with, well, have I done enough at home with family? But when I came back into this role, after an 18-month hiatus as an entrepreneur, I do think that it gave me a lens, and that experience gave me a lens and a perspective to help me balance that out, because getting burnt out can be very costly. It can cause you to elicit behaviors that are not consistent with who you are. Quite frankly, it can cause you to not be as effective as who you desire to be. And then that has a direct impact on your brand, your personal brand, and where it is that you're trying to go. So it's important for you to take that inventory and realize time and effort, and making sure that you're doing the self check. I would imagine now more than ever, with the stresses that we're dealing with in general, with the global pandemic, with social unrest, you have to do that check-in point and really evaluate what it is that you can and cannot do. Because, we get on an airplane and we hear this phrase all the time: secure your own mask before you can assist others. The reason they say that is because you can't be helpful to other people if you haven't got your own mask secured. And I think once you do that, you're able to be more effective, and you're able to be more impactful, and you're able to really carry that journey in a more meaningful way to effectiveness, to actually mean something at limited cost to oneself. So I think it's important for you to understand and constantly do that evaluation process throughout the journey, because higher education is demanding.
Yeah, it is. Lamar, can I flip that question just a little bit? It harkens back to our previous question, because sometimes, whether or not you work at the pleasure of, there are times in our career where we hit that ceiling, and we have to have a very hard and wholesome conversation with ourselves. And I think sometimes, as professionals, mentoring and pouring into others, we do a disservice to those individuals by not telling them that, hey, it's okay to have a game plan. It's okay to work in increments. I work in 5-year increments, meaning by that 5th year, some of the goals that I should have set for years 1 through 4, have I accomplished them? Is there more that I could offer? Could we tease this out and continue to grow and develop? And so, as Dr. Fluker mentioned, sort of putting on your mask first, so then you're able to help others. Sometimes it's okay, again, to step back and reflect and assess and figure out if there's more growth there. And then, if not, sort of pivoting, that key word that we've all become accustomed to figure out what is next. And I want to leave something with the folks who are on with us tonight. I think some of my best, and if not hardest and most difficult lessons in my professional journey, I have learned when I have been asked to do something that I don't want to do. In hindsight, 2020, those were skill sets that I needed, that I didn't acknowledge or couldn't see the forest for the trees, that I needed, and it was going to create some growth. So don't be afraid when you hit that ceiling, or that job doesn't end the way that you had envisioned it. Another opportunity is coming. It's out there. It has your name on it. What's for you is for you. But use that opportunity, that time away, to really reflect, get back connected to the core, and really ask yourself again, what am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to make a difference?
Thank you both for your responses. You two are just phenomenal. I'm sorry, I keep saying it. You've impacted my life, and I'm just so thankful for you being here and having this conversation. So many people have been impacted. And one last question, and this one is, we've talked a lot about the pandemic. We've mentioned the pandemic in many, many ways and how it's affected our lives. And my question is, how has COVID, from your perception, affected higher education and the skill set needed to find success for a lot of individuals? And to layer that, the second part of that question would be, is a higher education degree still necessary in our current climate? So how has COVID affected higher education? And in turn, does that mean, is a higher education degree still necessary to find success in our current climate?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. How has COVID impacted higher education? So for one, in March, when this all went down, I'll be the first one to say I was not directly in higher education. I was doing some correspondences for some university presidents, and for me, I wanted to be of service. And at the time, I was having conversations about getting back into higher education. So I'd like to think that the pandemic was an influencer for me, along with the pandemic, but also the space of social unrest. The death of George Floyd personally impacted me to start thinking, how can I get back into a space where I think I can add value to developing young Black leaders? That's when I started really rethinking about coming back into higher education. So, how COVID has impacted higher education on a personal level is I'm back in the game. I wanted to be on the front line. I wanted to help and offer solutions. I mentioned that processes are what I thrive off of, and I knew that having clear processes was a part of it. But as it relates to higher education, one of the things that we've learned is that higher ed was behind from a technological standpoint. And what this whole experience did is it really forced us to think through, as institutions of higher learning, how we could embrace and leverage, in some cases, funding from a federal perspective, but then also other corporations and organizations that wrap their arms around higher ed to position us to be more technologically advanced. And the way that one of my higher ed colleagues shared with me, we advanced like 16 years overnight, where we were able to create classrooms without walls, where we were able to create access and accessibility as it relates to synchronous and asynchronous classes, and completely pivot, which was a theme word for 2020, pivot our way of doing business to try to retain as many students as we could, and in some cases grow the online student population to respond. So the pandemic has its negative qualities. 2020 has gotten a lot of criticism. People were quick to usher 2020 right on out the door. But the truth of the matter is the impact of 2020 is exactly what 2020 was intended to be. For those of us who wear glasses, these things help us see things clearly. They bring us to a clarity of vision. Vision 2020. A lot of schools use that as a theme. Alabama State used that as a theme when we were recruiting class of 2020. But that clarity of understanding, I think, was heard loud and clear in higher education. We did gain a level of perspective and understanding as it relates to understanding that which we're here to do and how we can be more impactful in doing it. The pandemic gets the opportunity to gain full credit for higher education, I think elevating our game and gaining the support that we needed to be able to be effective. Are we there? Are we where we need to be? No, we're not. We're still learning, or as some people say, we're still building the plane as we fly it. But the truth of the matter is that we're way ahead of where we thought we were going to be because this was a highly impactful piece. And then the other question, the last question was the value of a higher education degree. I work in corporate relations, and the truth of the matter is that corporations have since removed degree requirements from certain jobs. That's part of it. But I think that if we think that higher education is limited to degrees, we've missed the mark. When you look at the role that higher education has played over the years, it's about continuous improvement. It's about um, uh, you know, education units that help complement those who've already gotten their college degrees. It's about master's degrees. It's about terminal degrees. It's about certificate programs. And so what we're starting to see is the evolution of education, and education taking its rightful place, being an element of development, not just defined by how many bachelor's degrees have we issued in this particular year, but more so about how we enhancing and developing a workforce that is responsive to the immediate needs of industry, the immediate needs of the economy, the immediate needs of the environment that we operate in. And so I think we have seen an evolution of the definition and the role of higher education. When I went to school, when I went to college in 1992, it was about degrees. But I think today, as a person who's operating in that space, it's about how do you enhance individuals so they can be more impactful. Central State University, my only plug, I haven't used any commercial time. We've seen a slight drop in our enrollment from our usual 2,000 or so students in the 1,800s or so. But the other side of it is that when you look at our online programming, partnering with the union that had 2-year degree programs, we went from 28 students in one semester, and we went to 2,000 students. And today, that was one semester over, 2,000 students, one semester over. And then today we're at 3,000, aiming towards 4,000 students. That is tripling the size of the university student population in a single year period. Why? Because we partnered with the AFL-CIO, and we've been able to offer those who have 2-year degrees in their spaces a 4-year solution. And so we're seeing an evolution of higher education, and the value proposition, I think, is shifting because we're able to offer that. So those are my thoughts as it relates to the pandemic response, and more importantly, the value of the higher education degree.
Yeah, I think Dr. Fluker has summed it up well. I want to give credit to our institutions, particularly our historically Black colleges and universities and other minority serving institutions who have weathered this storm, oftentimes underserved and under-resourced. And I would agree. I think COVID-19, for a myriad of factors, has impacted us from enrollment to revenue to human capital on our campuses. But I think the positive in all of this is something that she just said, is that it has caused us to get a lot more creative, innovative, and strategic, and thinking about ways in which we can grow right beyond just these four walls. And so I would say, and Fluker and I've had this conversation before, when we come out, hopefully on the other side of this, those institutions that have really, and I hate to say, started thinking or have been thinking outside of the box, that's so cliche-ish. But when I think about those institutions that are pushing the envelope in areas that they hadn't thought about before, again, having a very strong online presence. When I think about reaching back to other populations of individuals who may have stopped out of college at some point. Is this a good time to target populations that we could bring back? When we think about individuals who may have some work experience or lived experience, how do we couple that with a curriculum that then helps that person eventually graduate? And let's not let this be lost on us. Education just doesn't have to be narrowly focused to our city or town, our state, our nation. When we talk about globalization, is this an opportunity to really sort of connect the world by means of computers and technology? So I think for those of us who are thinking outside of that box and other ways to make a difference in individuals' lives, will come out of this experience a lot better.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for being here. COVID is not destroying our country. In a lot of ways, it's causing us to be innovative. It's causing us to take it to the next level and do things that we should have already done. It is not the end. So thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm like a kid in the candy store, living part of my dream and being able to share it with both of you who have impacted my life so tremendously. So again, thank you. We here at the Tulsa Initiative, we are supporting Black women. We're pushing Black women forward, and we are doing all that we can to align ourselves in allyship. I want to say Tulsa Initiative, we are a nonprofit organization that is changing lives, cultivating minds to change lives. We're doing it through the Tulsa Leadership Academy, the Tulsa Shark Tank, which I am a byproduct of. I participated in the first ever Tulsa Leadership Academy and placed second in the Shark Tank. And now I'm able to work with this amazing organization. And we have Tulsa Speaks. We have many, many programs that are pouring out and educating and cultivating these mindsets to liberate us from what is our daily norms and not have just surviving. We're taking survival and we're taking it to thriving. And that's what we are pushing for. If you have enjoyed this conversation, if you want to have more conversation like these live, if you want to be a part of this, please, please, please donate to the Tulsa Initiative again at www.tulsanonprofit.org, or you can use Cash App, $ Tulsa Nonprofit. It's right here on the screen below, scrolling if you missed it. I love you all so, so, so much. We have another episode of the Tulsa Roundtable coming up on January the 22nd. It's going to be about Black women in politics. We are focusing on Black women in politics, and it's going to be a doozy. I promise you, it's going to be a fire episode. Our new VP is just going to be installed. We're going to have a grand time. So please make sure that you tune in to the episode on the January the 22nd. I thank you all so much for being here with us. I love you. I wish you nothing but the best in a prosperous life. And your boy LB the Motivator, your friendly neighborhood hope dealer, I'm out. Peace.
Please.